Shalom, welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Well, one important governmental transition ended this week, having global implications, of course. Another one with regional repercussions is still ongoing, and there is a connection between the two. The new post-Assad regime in Damascus under Ahmed al-Shara, or commonly referred to as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, is still being organized, with simultaneous efforts being undertaken in foreign policy as well as domestic realignment. Al-Shara and his lieutenants have met with Arab and European counterparts from Berlin to Paris to Gulf capitals. Al-Shara himself changed his attire from battle fatigues to a suit and tie. But can a Jihadi, al-Qaeda affiliate, predator truly change his spots? This will probably become known only after the Trump administration unveils its Mideast policy, part of which will relate to Syria. Joining us for the discussion include Dr. Nir Bohms, who is a senior fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University.
Good to be here.
Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve Elik Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's a pleasure to have you also with us, General.
Thank you.
And with me here in the studio is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
You know, that detail you noted about his changing his attire, Al-Julani's, is not only symbolic. It does reflect substance. If you take quote-unquote revolutionary leaders such as Fidel Castro, who of course kept his uniform from his underground days. If you take Arafat, who wore his khakis, Zelensky, they all wanted to get across a message of business not as usual. Julani, in a reverse motion, threw away what he wore during his HTS days and now wants to be seen as a statesman. He wants to portray Syria under his regime as normalizing. He's trying to unify the country. He's sending peace feelers to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, to almost every country around him except Israel, which we will talk about. And of course, he wants the sanctions lifted over his own head, over Syria, under Assad and under himself. So we are in the very first formative phase of his rule over Syria.
Well, he's still classified a terrorist by the State Department, by the United Nations, and by the European Union, among others. But Dr. Bohms, when we're talking about Al-Julani, a man inspired by the atrocities al-Qaeda committed on 9/11 by the bombings of the Twin Towers, joining subsequently al-Qaeda in Iraq, becoming a very capable fighter as being basically recruited under Abu al-Marzouk, who was, of course, a very known terrorist with much blood on his hands. He didn't go up the ranks for not having blood on his hands, either American or European. This same man has subsequently also, he was incarcerated in 2006 to 2011, where he was also in two occasions, not necessarily a cellmate, but in close proximity to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who then instructed him to return to Syria and launch Jabhat al-Nusra, which was initially an offshoot of the Islamic State. Then, following their disagreements, he decided to align himself once again under Ayman al-Zawahiri and al-Qaeda, a man that, of course, has maintained his jihadist aspirations and declaratively and proactively pursued those objectives full-heartedly, committing massacres time and again throughout Syria, also in Idlib. And just in the last several months and years, we do see him increasingly aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood under Qatar, under Turkey, and now after conquering Damascus, even though his own forces did not do so, both countries, Doha and Ankara, are pushing for him to consolidate power there. What have I missed here?
Well, first of all, let's just add to it, because we sometimes judge a leader not just by his own track record, but also by his compatriots and his allies. And in the new government in Syria, and at least in the transitional team that is installed, you have a number of other distinguished colleagues who are on the terrorist list, who have been colleagues of not just Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but also Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda. So you have a very significant track record. What you may have missed, or what others are arguing at the moment as they're trying to give all of this interesting scenario the benefit of the doubt, is to paraphrase this sentence that was attributed to a few people, that if you are not a Democrat in the age of 25, you don't have a heart, and if you're not a conservative by the age of 35, you don't have a brain. So whether there is a scenario in where a jihadist, just like leopard, can change its colors, that question is not an easy one to answer. But I will say the following: the division of Ahmed al-Shara is something which he, and I'll paraphrase, speaks about the Syrian national project. And the idea of the Syrian national project is an attempt of a power sharing model, in where minorities have rights, in where the different groups, which are not just ethnic or minority groups, these are also militias or groups that are armed, will be a part of the new Syrian national project and the new Syrian military. The Kurds, for example, he needs the Kurds to be a part of his project. And in order to make sure the Kurds are there, he needs to guarantee that the Kurds will have rights. Of course, if Turkey has a say on this, and Turkey has a say in all of this, that's not going to be the case. The Alawites also need to be guaranteed a degree of rights and tolerance, and they have been not just the one in control, but also the one who tortured the vast majority of these other groups. And what we've seen so far on the ground is not necessarily akin to the type of tolerant that is prescribed with the meeting with the suits and the ties. So he has objective problems, not just conceptual problems. Even if we will buy the idea that there may be some degree of pragmatism and some attempt to fit the political vision into the needs of relieving the sanctions and getting some alliances and some political credit in order that he will be able to see some assistance to a country that now can hardly feed its people, and where people are queuing in for bread that is sold in the black market, and people can hardly afford it, then that's the only thing he can do. And even if we're buying this, the objective problems are still paramount. And we're still not sure, certainly not based on the government that he installed. When you have a minister of justice that is filmed overseeing public executions, or a minister of defense that has a similar award on his head. So we're not yet sure that this particular team will be able to implement a more pragmatic and moderate vision. Time will tell. And in the meantime, I think we need to accept this with a healthy degree of skepticism. But at the same token, if something can be change in Syria, and if he will be able to create a power sharing model and bring all the different communities, including the stakeholders that are very far away from his Islamist inner circle, that's something that should be encouraged.
I reserve my doubts with regard to him. A man who claims to be reformed does not appoint all the people you referred to, taking into account the fact that the justice minister didn't only oversee, but he took the pistol and shot one of the women that he condemned to death for committing adultery. It says plenty about that justice minister, as well as on Abu Muhammad al-Julani as well, and an education minister who comes and changes the entire curriculum of the Syrian education system, going as far as translating the Surah al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, by not only establishing the vague reference in which this chapter essentially tells Muslims to hate and resent both Jews and Christians, those who turned against God and those who rebelled against him. This is the reference. They went and they explicitly wrote Christians and Jews rather than keeping it vague. So they're very overtly active in those actions. They're also during Christmas sending a convoy of armed men by HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham of Al-Julani, to one of the towns in the area of Damascus in order to disrupt Christian worship during Christmas. It also indicates the true nature of those people. But General, I'd like to ask you particularly about the military composition, since Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, alongside the Kurdish, the Turkish proxies of Jaish al-Watani, include roughly 60,000 troops. They do have heavy weaponry, they do have various types of munitions, but their major backer in their military campaign was no other than the Republic of Turkey. And at the same time, if we're looking at the various minority groups, as well as Jaish al-Hur, the Free Syrian Army that is not part of Jaish al-Watani, we're talking here about hundreds of thousands of troops with light munitions, heavy munitions, be they the Druze with double the number almost that this Al-Julani has, or the Kurds that triple the number that Al-Julani has. He cannot consolidate power in Damascus without those forces being under his influence. Are we expected to see this fluid situation consolidated, or is this going to erupt unless those minorities are receiving the guarantees that they have asked for, which includes freedom of worship, among others?
I think Syria has always been a heterogeneous state in its composition, demographic and otherwise. Most of the Christians have left many, many years ago, and only a small minority left, not to speak of the Jews, who can be counted single-handedly. The composition within Syria is something which is probably not possible to consolidate because of tribal interests running each group, and within those tribal groups, they are also split in their political affiliations. So the ability of Syria to garner any support or be able to launch a military campaign of any kind at this time is non-existent. Remember that those warriors who carry Kalashnikovs and light weapons are not really soldiers. They are militias at best, or nomads who can ride in trucks and show a shootout out there, a little bit like the Houthis in Yemen. So it doesn't look like they can consolidate more than a policing force within Syria, and not being able to extend its power to the outskirts and the strongholds of the Druze or the Kurds. And two kinds of Kurds: the ones who are for Turkey and ones who are against Turkey in the northeastern part, and so on, and the Alawites who are left in a dire situation along the coast. So they may be called a state, but it will take them a long time, if at all, to establish any kind of a logical government controlling Syria. And you've talked about the educational system. You may want to change the books, but somebody needs to print those books, send them out to the different areas with directives and so on. So it's more of, I would say, a propaganda piece or wishful thinking at best. It's not that easy to change educational systems in Western countries, let alone areas like this. So we should be more worried about not subversive, but chaotic groups running around trying to control or show off or being paid, for instance, by Iran to harass our eastern border in the Golan Heights and such. And obviously, Israel is watching very carefully after having taken out most of the Syrian army heavy capabilities, including almost all fighter planes, helicopters, missile systems, depots, etc., etc. So there's no real military threat, but chaos sometimes even worse because there's nobody to hold those groups under leash, and that could provide a problem. That is why Israel has changed its positions along the Syrian front, and I guess we'll be talking about that somewhere later.
Absolutely. We will discuss this at length. We do not have very much time for everything, but we'll try and cover as much as possible. One point that I find very interesting, Mr. Owen, is the fact that when we're looking at Turkey and Qatar, who do declaratively see this as a victory for them, even though the vacuum that emerged due to Israel's war with Iran and its various proxies allowed it to capture Damascus without any true resistance. And therefore, I'm asking myself a couple of questions. One, the current situation on the ground. When we're talking about Damascus, when we're talking about all of the towns and villages that go between Damascus and the border with Turkey, one thing that is very apparent is the destruction that is really thwarting or preventing the ability to restart any type of economy, any type of rehabilitation of the Syrians that fled the country or were internally dislocated to other locations within the country. But their ability to reach a certain compromise demands them to cooperate with the United States, with Europe, and the West at large. To what degree is this viable, considering the fact that Washington views al-Julani as a terrorist, for all intents and purposes, different from the outgoing administration that thought to somehow figure out certain terms and conditions for his cooperation? And the sanctions, the Caesar Act, so to speak, it's not only not removed, except for a couple of small paragraphs related to energy, but Caesar Act 2.0 is still on the table and is expected to go into effect at some point once voted upon in order to further establish leverage over Damascus in this context. It's quite challenging to see how they get out of it.
Yes, but this is realpolitik rather than simply looking at bad actors and trying to isolate them. And of course, Trump knew how to deal with the leaders of North Korea, of Russia. He is pragmatic, and if it suits his general policy, he will also ignore al-Julani's previous record, much as Kenyatta of Kenya or Ben Bella and then Boumediene of Algeria and many others were accepted, not to mention the vilification of people like Begin and Shamir when the State of Israel was established. And then, of course, the world accepted their being politicians and eventually prime ministers. Now, al-Julani knows that he must have reconstruction. In that sense, the flip side of crisis is opportunity for Saudi Arabia to replace Iran. Al-Julani even met with Ukrainian leaders in order for them to ally Ukraine with the new Syria rather than Russia with its interest there. And there is also a very, very important effort on his part to reach out to the diaspora in Western Europe and elsewhere, because there are millions of Syrians who may consider going home, or the host governments may consider sending them home. For all of that, first of all, he needs peace and quiet on the home front and along the borders, which bodes well, at least for the time being.
Indeed. Well, all Western governments are looking at ways to return those Syrians back to Syria. Nevertheless, with a jihadist organization at the top, there are a lot of question marks with regard to this aspect, particularly also from the relevant parties, namely the E3, Britain, Germany, and France. But Dr. Bombs, when we see the Iranians and the Russians pledging that this story is not over necessarily, with the PKK headquarters in Iran proper. The RGC Quds Force, of course, does seek to expand various operations at the directives of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei against Turkey and the various Sunni forces in Syria to once again gain the upper hand in its crumbling axis. Are we expected to see a certain surge in activities against the Al-Julani regime, so to speak, even though this regime is not truly functioning?
Well, I think this issue is becoming even more complicated, Jonathan. Russia, aside of supporting the Assad regime, also provided quite a lot of merchandise and particularly wheat. Now, when the Russians are there, the wheat is not there, and the prices of bread has gone almost tenfold up, and it's about 4,000 lira, and in the black market and in the subsidized bakeries, you can hardly get it. So the needs are paramount, and that's where your sanctions discussion becomes even more relevant. Pragmatism, in that sense, can be more or less an ideological component, but is absolutely necessary if Al-Julani even wish to succeed. Now, the Russians, of course, have interest. They've left bases. They want to keep them. The Iranians, who had admittedly said that they were sort of defeated and that Assad also betrayed them, still have some of the Alawites on their side, and they're trying to say that we are still playing that game and we are able to somehow continue. The Turks, of course, would like to make sure that that's going to be their entire sphere of influence, and they do not want to see others, not talking about the Kurds, which is certainly a very strict Turkish policy, but other countries take a stake in the Syrian file and trying to influence and push Al-Julani one place or the other. So you have some who are trying to push Al-Julani toward one direction, closer to the Turkish alliance, closer to Qatar, closer to its core ideological upbringing. And there are those who are trying to push him to another direction, reminding him that his father was a cousin of the former foreign minister of Syria, Farouk al-Shara. His grandfather has been fighting the France. He grew up more secular, and he took up the jihadi upbringing later in life, and therefore there may be a chance for some degree of redemption. And between all of that, he needs to maneuver and find a way to actually put bread on the table, because without that, his vision of putting something on the table for the other communities, creating a Syrian national project, and actually be able to help the communities to say, hey, join something that's working, is not going to be on the table. And most probably, what we're seeing and what we have seen before is that Syria might remain tacitly Syria. But we used to call it in this program the country that used to be Syria, which will again become de facto divided and controlled according to the lines of ethnic groups, and then also according to the lines of influence, in where countries like the United States, Turkey, and perhaps even Israel will be able to play a role to make sure that some communities will remain where they are.
which are, of course, which was the way Syria used to be under the Ottoman Empire for 400 years. This has also some context on a historical level. But, General, we don't have very much time left. In 1 minute and 10 seconds, what can you tell us about the Israeli presence, particularly along the Golan Heights, DMZ zone? Syria wants Israel out. Nonetheless, as you mentioned, Israel needs security guarantees and also has a red line. It's stated clearly the Druze are a red line. If heavy weaponry are going in the direction of Sweda or other major Druze cities, Israel will act decisively.
Yes, Israel wants to control the border points so that it can actually supervise movements along the Golan Heights and also improve the supervision by taking what we call the Syrian Golan Heights, which have a better placing or better vision of the Damascus basin. That's why Israel has taken it temporarily, not in order to stay there, but in order to make sure that until Syria is stabilized into a coherent state, Israel will have a tactical advantage if any forthcoming subversive forces or Iranian-led forces or pushed forces tried to sneak across the border. That is why it moved into the militarized zones. We're probably going to stay there until we understand what happens. This is also an insinuation of what may happen if the Druze are not kept safe. And the fact that there are quite a few Druze in Israel itself who are connected to the Druze in the eastern side of the Golan Heights make it a kind of a safety belt for Israel. And obviously, we've given our vows to the Druze.
We will have to revert to this topic in the very near future, since this is still a fluid situation. I'd like to thank General Reddick Shafir, Dr. Nir Boms, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.